and it's in the breaking we come unbound. And it's in the giving we are found. Yeah, you could barely change.
Welcome to A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, a podcast dedicated to the telling of authentic stories and the sharing of insightful wisdom, exploring science and spirituality, medicine and Mother Nature. No topic is off limits when it comes to growing our personal understanding and supporting our collective well-being. With your host, Dr. Rob Abbott, a family medicine resident practicing spiritually focused and evolutionarily informed functional medicine, we hope to nourish your being so that you can flourish in whatever the moment has called for you to do.
And I know you try.
In episode 44 of A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, I welcome evolutionary psychiatrist and pioneer studying the genetic underpinnings of mental health, Dr. Emily Deans. Since first discovering the ancestral and functional medicine movements, I have been an avid follower of Dr. Deans and her curious yet practical explorations into our evolving understanding of psychiatric illness. Dr. Deans is a practicing psychiatrist who utilizes an ancestrally informed nutritional approach, as well as targeted pharmaceutical interventions to improve those with previously treatment-refractory depression or other mental illness. She's a regular contributor at Psychology Today with her blog, Evolutionary Psychiatry, where she explores the role of nutrition and genetic variability, amongst many other topics, and their impact on mental well-being. In this episode, Dr. Dean starts us off with a little background into her first experience in medicine and why she chose to pursue psychiatry, detailing her own life journey that led her to explore more integrative approaches to well-being. She then leads us into the meat of today's discussion, a beautifully articulated story detailing the function, regulation, and variability of some of the most well-studied genes in psychiatric health, including the recently popularized MTHFR and COMT, taking us on a journey of the neurotransmitter from its production, release, reuptake, or breakdown, to its eventual signaling and the downstream cascade of events stemming from its simple signal. Dr. Deans offers insights as to why many of the medicines we use to treat psychiatric illness are not effective or simply not enough to help someone through a period of significant depression. She provides us with an integrated theory of mental illness, combining our emerging understanding of inflammation and immune activation in the brain with the role of neurotransmission and neuronal connectivity circuits that are influencing our behaviors. This podcast is one of my absolute favorites, and it was such an honor to have Dr. Deans on the show. It is quite incredible to think back to my own journey struggling with depression in medical school and the influence of Dr. Deans' work some 5 years later to lead me to an amazingly new understanding of whole person wellness. And with that, let's dig into the show. Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you. I've been following your work for what seems like years and years now, and just really excited for you to share more of that work here in this space. So thank you for joining me.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me on.
So I'd love for you for people who aren't familiar with you and your work, would love it if you wanted to give a brief introduction to what it is that you're currently doing, and really what is the passion behind all of the work that you put out.
Well, so I am pretty much a sort of boring general adult psychiatrist. I practice outpatient in the suburbs of Boston. I also teach in sort of the intro to psych class teaching people how to interview and basics about psychiatric diagnosis to the Harvard medical students. And I've been up here in Boston since 2000 after I graduated med school, and I went to residency here. And but I'm originally from Texas. So I think, part of what sets Texans, I think, a little bit aside from maybe other people in the United States or around the world is we tend to be very pragmatic.
Yeah.
It's all about sort of what's going to work. Don't waste my time. Is this going to work or is it not going to work? And sort of, it's funny because it's sort of the opposite of psychiatry when you want to dive into the reasons and the causes and what your relationship was with your mother and your father and your first teacher and all that. And I'm interested in all that stuff, but it's also kind of like, but if that's irrelevant, then, we'll toss it aside. What are the solutions? And so I'm really sort of a solutions-based person. And I think that's what made me kind of pursue this blog that I started back in 2010 called Evolutionary Psychiatry. And it took off fairly quickly, which was very surprising to me because it's mostly about mental illness and biochemistry,
Yeah.
which aren't really hot topics, I wouldn't think.
Well, to people like myself, it's I love it. So, but you're right. Maybe on the surface, it's not necessarily the hottest thing to read.
And the whole reason I did it was because I had my second child. I'd gained a lot of weight during pregnancy, and I really did not have the time with two little girls to count calories, which is how I'd always kind of maintained weight before. And so I tried a sort of a variation of a paleo style diet, and I found it worked really, really well. It was fairly effortless other than the fact that you couldn't kind of, just knock some foods off your list. But I wasn't hungry. I felt good. My skin cleared up. And I thought, wow, if this can affect, how I'm doing and how I'm feeling and how my skin looks and things like that, I bet it can affect mental health. And so I went looking around at lots of papers and especially sort of layperson books that were available at the time. And I would look in the back and I would pull up the paper, and I kind of realized that what was said in the paper was misrepresented in the books. I'm not going to mention the books, but
Yeah.
and then I realized, oh crap, if I'm going to figure out what's really going on with this, I'm going to have to do all this work myself. So that's why I started the blog, mostly to teach myself.
Yeah.
Because if I can explain something, if I can teach something, then I can learn it. And so in that capacity, I just sort of, whatever interests me, whether it's exercise or food or genetics or, climate or anything in its effects on kind of physiology and mental health, therapy, some things that are none of my business, like statins, all of that, I'll just write about it. And after a year or two, I think, I was invited to write for Psychology Today. So now for the last several years, all of my blogs have been over there. I write probably about once a month. And if you just Google Evolutionary Psychiatry, Psychology Today, or my name, Emily Dean's Psychology Today, you'll find my blog there. And I would guess I have several hundred articles. And over 5 million views, which is pretty wild. Because again, I wouldn't think 5 million people would want to read, biochemistry. But there's a lot of practical stuff. It's really mostly about what can we adjust, mostly besides therapy and meds. What can we learn from how meds work, how supplements work, what the receptors are, how our genes work, how the genes, what do we know, how it overlaps with mental illness. Because I really, before 2009, we had almost no research into, say, nutrition and mental illness in the brain, nothing that was particularly good. So I started the blog in 2010, which was pretty good timing on my part.
Yeah.
Because nutritional psychiatry research has really kind of exploded, and finally we have some real data to share, which there was really nothing back in 2010 and before. And also genetics research has been really going forth. And with my title of my blog, Evolutionary Psychiatry, obviously genetics is a big part of it, because the whole idea of it was, is there a mismatch between the world in which we live, sort of psychologically and physically, and how our brains were evolved? And obviously there is, but does that cause mental illness?
Yeah.
And if that's so, what can we adjust to make lives better? But you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, we don't want cholera. We want to have nice, clean water. We want sewage treatment plants. We want to still be able to fly on airplanes and do all these cool kind of modern things. But what can we do to adjust things? It's not too expensive, not too quacky, not too dangerous, and help people feel better.
Yeah, it's a very practical mindset. I appreciate you sort of sharing realistically what it is, the types of patients you're seeing and working with, and that perspective of being a solutions-oriented person. And it's not that you don't acknowledge some of the other details and, aspects of someone's story or things you could do from a therapy standpoint, but finding really from a very practical and pragmatic standpoint, what am I going to be able to do for this person, right now at this point? But keeping a very open lens as we really kind of go forth in this new age of emerging genetic data. And I definitely want to spend most of our time today kind of exploring some of the research and ideas that you've been sort of putting together between some of this, emerging genetic data and these associations with, certain SNPs, and also some of this, emerging research with pharmacogenomics and how certain drugs affect people differently, depending on their certain genetics. And so definitely want to go there today in the podcast, but was curious if, a lot of times we talk about our life story and it starts at one distinct period of time, one major life event. And you did allude to this fact that maybe our relationships with our mother or someone else in our family have some impact on what we end up doing or how we see the world. And was just kind of curious for you, was there anything particularly in your early childhood, any particular formative experience within medicine or healthcare or relationship that kind of guided you in this path that you're on right now?
I guess I would say my family was. My father has a PhD in electrical engineering, so he's not a big emotions guy by any means.
Yeah.
He's very pragmatic and practical. He's a Texan. How do you fix it? What's wrong? Where are the answers and solutions? Whereas my older sister was, a music major. So sort of a very emotional, artistic kind of a person. And I kind of feel like some of my job growing up was a little bit of a translator between the two of them. And I could also see different aspects of those. And I think that's kind of where my place is. I think I really have kind of an engineering brain, but also the ability to kind of be empathic, excuse me, and sort of sort out people's emotions and where they're coming from, and not let those emotions kind of overwhelm reason, and then kind of put it all together and knit it together for people in a way that helps them kind of have a way of looking at things. And for the same way, I think very pragmatically about the brain and personality. For a long time, there was kind of a war in psychiatry, and then also sort of psychiatry versus psychology. So psychiatrists are more on the sort of severely mentally ill, and we prescribe medication. Psychologists tend to do therapy or psychological testing, those kinds of things. And even in Britain today, there's a kind of whole segment, we sort of call them the anti-psychiatry segment, and there's even anti-psychiatry books and things like that about how this theories that psychosis is caused by repressed trauma, and for me, I don't care if it's repressed trauma or not. Psychosis is a physiologic process that happens in the brain.
Yeah.
And, how does that happen? It happens, all of our thoughts, all of our personalities are little flashing electrochemical signals going in and out of the brain, and we can adjust those things, both, through lifestyle, through medication, through all sorts of stuff. So to me, that whole, is it all caused by trauma or blah, 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 or versus, how much is genetic or inborn? Of course, the real answer is it's kind of a mix of both. It's sort of environmental insults, plus your genetic vulnerability to certain insults over time, right? So that's kind of the true answer. But to me, the whole argument is just silly. It kind of misses the forest for the trees, because what's really going on is it's all mediated in the physiology of the brain. And if we can figure that out, if we can figure out the inflammation, if we can figure out how neurons talk to each other, if we can figure out where it's shorting out or there's too much signal or too little, then we can very finely tune our treatments, whether it's for psychosis or mania or for, PTSD, trauma, depression, anxiety, substance abuse. So that, I guess, and I sort of translate from that kind of scientific thinking about the brain to, boy, this person's in front of me and they're not sleeping and they're not eating very well and they have no motivation, no energy, and their father died a year ago and they lost their job, and you can't be talking to them about neurons right off the bat.
Yeah.
You have to be able to kind of translate.
That's really beautiful. And it's, I've never probably heard it articulated in that way. And I feel like that's also something that I've been drawn to, is how can sort of take that sort of scientific perspective, but really be with that person in that bubble and sort of really go with empathy and understanding their experience, but not losing the physiology and what might be going on at a cellular level, as that really could have an impact on what you choose to do to help them. So I love that sort of description. You started to allude to a few things that I think would be great to get into. Perhaps we can start maybe overall with, why should we care or look at our genetics or our genetic expression or variations in how genes have changed through time? Why should we look at these things when it comes to mental illness or our mental health?
So I think when people first started studying the genetics of illnesses, we came across a few that were pretty clear, like Down syndrome. You have the extra chromosome, trisomy 21, or cystic fibrosis. I mean, we now know there are multiple genes for that, but there's kind of one pretty obvious recessive gene that's passed on in families in a particular way. It was pretty easy to figure that out. There's also some other genes for things like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, as I'm sure you're aware, and many other sort of single gene diseases. Some of them dominant, like or caused by repeats in a certain region, like Huntington's disease or things like that. But when you really look for that single gene for almost anything in psychiatry, you don't find it. And then they've done huge studies in those Scandinavian countries where everybody gets their genome done, and they have the genome of all the relatives of every single person with schizophrenia in all of Sweden, right? Which is a really huge, nice data set, and they can do great correlation and observational studies with p-values of like 10 to the negative 8, So it's pretty compelling stuff. And what you really find is that all of these illnesses are polygenic, and it tends to be a spectrum. And there's no neat category. The DSM-5, or what we have now, it's just a recipe list of symptoms that's pulling together probably somewhat disparate genetic and electrochemical issues in the brain. So, the diagnosis gets kind of messy. You'll have a family where there's one person schizophrenic, another person bipolar, and there really is a spectrum with, let's say, major depressive disorder, the genes over here on the left. In the middle is bipolar disorder. On the right is schizophrenia. And there's kind of a continuum. They all have genes in common. But if you're sort of more toward the bipolar side, but you're mostly depressed, you might respond to medications or treatments differently. And the same is true if you have all the symptoms of bipolar, but your genes are kind of more on that schizophrenia side of things. You might also respond, we even have knowledge for this, that the bipolar people with more genes in common with sort of the major depression genes, they tend to respond better to lithium. The bipolar people on the side that's closer to schizophrenia, they tend to respond better to antipsychotics or antipsychotic mood stabilizers. So, just kind of learning that stuff on a general level helps us really understand where we're coming from, and also helps us understand the limitations of our sort of diagnostic categories as we see them now. We're trying to kind of figure out, for the very first time, we're able to kind of look at the brain while we're actually thinking. It's really hard to see that, to see the metabolism of the brain. But with modern PET scans and SPECT scans and QEEGs and fMRIs and other modalities like that, we're finally able to see what's going on in the human brain to some extent while we're using it, and not just after you're dead when they cut it open.
Yeah.
And we're also able to take, for example, skin cells now. So we can take the skin cell from a bipolar person and dedifferentiate that skin cell or a fibroblast back into sort of a stem cell, and then redifferentiate that into a neuron. And you can put that neuron in a test tube and see how the different neurotransmitters respond to it, how it responds to different medications in the petri dish and things like that. And while that's not the same as seeing as how it's working in the brain, it's way better than what we had before. It's way better than lining up people and drilling holes in their heads and getting brain biopsies too. So, which, it's hard to get the IRB to approve that. So,
that'd be a little difficult.
It's a lot easier to get a few skin scrapings and you're done, right? So this is all, it's very, very exciting. We'll be able to know all sorts of stuff. And I think as a psychiatrist in this modern world, we have to start to learn about these genes. And, I see pushback to these genetic tests. I think they started off with how you metabolize medications.
Correct.
Which was probably a mistake, because many of the new meds, we just had a bunch of Me Too meds come out over the years. They were designed really for people who didn't metabolize other meds well. So a lot of times the testing was just about the metabolism of meds. It would recommend the newest, most expensive meds. Mm-hmm. And psychiatrists tend to be suspicious. So you start to think, oh, what a weird coincidence that every single person gets recommended this super expensive new antidepressant when, there's no data to show that antidepressant is more effective than all this old cheap stuff that we've had forever, right? So I think that was part of the problem. The second part is that they've just now started to do more about the pathophysiology, and it's early days, and you don't want to think that this is a Rosetta Stone and all the answers, because it's certainly not. But I could start, if I do genetic testing on a patient, I can start, if I have to. I don't do it on everybody. Obviously, if it's pretty basic and they're responding well to their meds, don't fix what ain't broke. But anybody most of the people who come to me as new patients have already, I might be the fifth psychiatrist they've seen or things like that, so they've already been through the ringer, have tried a bunch of stuff. And in those patients, you'll just find a story there of how their neurons are working, what pieces of them are kind of inefficient or broken. And it will tend to corroborate their experience of this didn't work, that didn't work, this, gave me side effects. And you can kind of trace down their experience. And to be honest, in medicine, if you couldn't fix somebody's problem, it's kind of like, oh, well, they're just whining or complaining, or they just have a personality disorder or something like that. So it's pretty eye-opening to see, wow, they really don't respond to Zoloft because they metabolize it super fast, or they get a ton of side effects all at once, and then it's gone, so it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So, when they were complaining about side effects, all these things, it's because they're all, metabolized by the same stuff. So, I've just found it pretty eye-opening, and I just have to be careful about what we say about personality disorders, because a lot of them are just, it's another aspect of the biology of the brain, and we can help people, get better. And be able to cope with their world better. So did you want to talk about specifics of the genetics and kind of what you might test for? Or?
Yeah, so I figure we could get into some of the maybe specific things you're looking at. Would love if you want to give a quick primer for folks in terms of, as you mentioned, someone comes into your office and you want to order their genetics and what does that even entail? Like, who are you going through? What does that involve? I think, we're still quite new in this space in terms of genetic testing, but give people a little primer of what that looks like and
So there
how
are
you do it.
two major companies who do this, and you can get some of this information just from kind of the raw data from 23andMe if you know what you're looking for, but they don't do all of the SNPs, and they're not as up to date as some of the companies. So if somebody doesn't have very much money, but they don't qualify for, a break on the genetic testing, they might just do 23andMe, and we can figure out from the raw data. But that's not as good as these companies test all the right SNPs. My favorite company is Genomind, and they have they're very helpful, very knowledgeable, and they have a pretty good website with lots of white papers and descriptions and links to all these papers. And a lot of my Psychology Today articles I've done about genetics have started from going to their website and seeing what the genes that they're testing, and then pulling the papers myself, and then pulling up the papers that come from those. And so they kind of get me on my starting place of looking for my own research on these genes. And I like their approach because it's similar to my own. It was started by a neurologist, I think, and that may be why he has this way of thinking. And so if someone's coming in and I'm going to do their genetics, all I do is actually you use a swab in the office. So they just swab the inside of their cheek, and you stick it in, and you send it off, FedEx, and you get the results back in about a week. And even if insurance doesn't pay for it, I think the max is $300. So most people are able to kind of manage that. And a lot of, Medicare, Medicaid patients, often it'll be free or $20. So they're pretty good company to work with. And you get this report back. And when I sit with the patient in the report and I go through sort of the abnormalities, and I do it like a story with kind of, first I start with one of the major issues, and very, very common in resistant depression, is the MTHFR gene, which is the methyltryptamine hydrofolate. You didn't hear me scramble on that part in the middle. And that is in Caucasian, and every population outside sub-Saharan African, a high percentage of people have at least some heterozygous mutants, some mutants in some of the most important alleles for that gene, because there's a thinking that perhaps being a little bit inefficient in making folic acid into methylfolate, which is the methylfolates used in the brain to make neurotransmitters and DNA and things like that, a little bit efficiency of that may have protected us from childhood diarrhea. So you could see how that would spread pretty rapidly in a population. And so something like, if 10% of the population, there's a major allele which is called the C677D, and 10% of the population, the Caucasian population, is homozygous mutant. That means they have 70% reduction in their ability to make folate into methylfolate. The thing, and then something like 30 to 50% are heterozygous for that gene. And then there's a secondary allele too. So that each mutant in that allele adds another 20% reduction. I've never seen the most I've ever seen was a homozygous and then a heterozygous on the minor allele. I don't think you could survive actually if you had no ability to make methylfolate. But some people are really siphoned down. And it's actually most of my patients with resistant depression have at least like a 55% reduction.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's much more common in resistant depression than the general population. So it makes me think that it's part of the cause, right? And their meds won't work, right? I've had people who come in, they've been to a bunch of psychiatrists, they've tried all sorts of different meds and none of them work. That's because they don't have any methylfolate. They don't have any neurotransmitters. They can't make them, right? Or they can make very few of them.
You can't reuptake serotonin if it's not there.
Right. And so you give them methylfolate, and holy crap, some of them have side effects to the meds they're on for the very first time. Like, oh, okay, so now they're working, right? So that's the starting place. Okay, do you make the neurotransmitters? Then you go to the next gene that's very interesting. Oh, and you can just bypass that by just giving them methylfolate, which is an available supplement. It's pretty easy. Oh, my family's home. Just a second.
You're
Let me
good.
shut the door. I don't like to keep the door shut because when nobody else is here, because the cats and the dogs will scratch at the door.
They'll freak out. Yeah.
Try to get in. But all right. So the next gene along the pathway that I talk about is on the presynaptic side of, let's say we're talking about a serotonin synapse, right? And that gene is the serotonin reuptake transporter. And you probably have heard of it because that is where all the SSRIs work, right? They all block that reuptake transporter, so you can't suck serotonin back into the cell and recycle it. And so if you block that receptor, it keeps more serotonin in the synapse for longer. And over time, this is how SSRIs tend to work, it increases really the efficiency of the transmission of serotonin, okay? But people, and this is also very common too, so 50% of the Caucasian and African-American populations are 20% are homozygous for like a short promoter for this. So they have fewer of those transporters. And 30%, I think, are heterozygous. And then another 50% is homozygous for the normal. So they have a normal amount of serotonin and transporter regions. So what we've learned is that for those heterozygous and then homozygous mutants, it's like the X-Men, but for depression. You have the SSRIs and most of the regular antidepressants that are mostly serotonin based, they don't work very well. And also these populations tend to, it doesn't precisely put you at a higher risk for depression, but if you have childhood trauma, you have a much higher risk of depression.
Yeah.
Especially if you are a short, which is the double kind of bad mutant, right? What's interesting is that when they tested college kids who had these different types of alleles, and the shorts, they just had everybody go up and they measured their cortisol before and after, and then a couple hours after, they gave a speech to people, which was a stressful event, right? So they had to give a 5-minute speech to a bunch of strangers in a room, and then they would test their cortisol. And the people with the short mounted a much higher cortisol response. So, and what's very interesting is that actually the Asian population, almost 60% of their population is short, which is much higher than the other populations. And so you just wonder if somewhere there was a bottleneck back years ago. This is just speculation, right? Of the ancestors of the current Asian populations, where the ability to mount a big old acute stress response somehow saved your life.
Yeah.
You know, and so they were the ones who kind of got through that bottleneck, and now that all their other descendants are mostly short. So it's kind of a fascinating, and you can make speculations which may or may not be. Probably there's way too many speculations about this, but does it change personality? Does it change, cooperation? If you tend to be more of kind of a stress ball to things, does that change how your society functions? If more people are like that and less are more sort of a little bit more laid back. So it's a little bit unfair because people who are liable to mount a higher stress and more intense stress response and are at higher risk of developing depression after childhood trauma, the antidepressants don't work very well for them. So it's kind of unfair. So that's the second part of the story. So do they make neurotransmitters by testing that MTHFR gene? And then are they able to recycle that serotonin, and where will the SSRIs and other kinds of medicines like that work for them? The third part of the story is right in the synapse, right? So there's a gene that you may have heard about, or or a enzyme you may have heard about called COMT, COMT, and that enzyme that breaks down your neurotransmitters. And this is kind of another interesting story, and there's lots of stuff you can read with probably unreasonable speculation about it. But normal is you have one of each allele. It's called a val-met, and that's normal. That's a regular amount of breakdown of the neurotransmitters. If you have a met, you actually are slower at breaking down the neurotransmitters. So your neurotransmitters are around for longer. You can make a stronger dopamine response. And they call them the worriers, right? Because you're just, you're really sort of reacting to everything, and you have a stronger dopamine response to everything, and a stronger norepinephrine and serotonin response to everything, and you don't degrade them very fast in the synapse. And then on the other side are the vals, which are the warriors. So valiant warrior is how I remember it.
Oh, that's
and
good.
The they degrade their neurotransmitters really fast, and they're called the warriors because they are looking for that dopamine rush, right? They respond better to things like stimulants, and they there's some interesting data in this, and it may, they may genotype you. For example, if you go into the army, into the military, they found that the vals are less likely to respond to placebo, to have a placebo response. They're less likely to develop PTSD from a trauma. So maybe you put your front stage people, you put your vals up there, and your worriers, you put maybe behind the lines, managing things, managing communications, things like that. So it's just kind of an interesting thought about what this might eventually lead to. But when we're talking about my story with a depressed person, so let's say they have somewhat diminished capacity to make neurotransmitters, they can't recycle the serotonin, and then they're a val, and they chew through their neurotransmitters too fast. And that's what I'll see with a lot of resistant depression. They will be ironically, they're the warrior, but they chew through their neurotransmitters too fast, and they can't make them because they also have a methylfolate problem. And, antidepressants don't really help that. Maybe a stimulant might, because it sort of gets in there and replaces the dopamine. But antidepressants, where you're trying to recycle neurotransmitters up in there, it's just not going to do the job. So and then we go to the end part. So the postsynaptic cell, where the communication is going to. And that's kind of where everything that we do tries to sort of work. So in that cell, you start to make a brain fertilizer, or BDNF, and do recovery and repair and communication along the way. So trying to reduce excitotoxicity and trying to, reduce inflammation and kind of reset things in that rest and digest, kind of getting back to normal set. And so the genetics along there, you can see some people have dopamine deletions. So they're not going to respond well to antipsychotics, for example, which block those receptors. They don't have the receptor, antipsychotics aren't going to work. And then also some of those people who are, let's say they're the warriors, the val, and you chew through all your dopamine and you give them an antipsychotic, they don't have a whole lot of dopamine to begin with. And then their dopamine, you try to block it.
It's blocked
and
it.
They get a lot of, EPS and other kind of symptoms you might have heard about. And then also you'll find some of those, like the serotonin postsynaptic, some of the genes of those receptors also tell you more about some of the side effects that you get from psychotropic meds. And so that's kind of interesting to know. And then finally, in that postsynaptic cell, we can learn from genes how efficiently you make the BDNF, the brain fertilizer. And so again, we're going along this whole chain of person. So let's say they're heterozygous for the MTHFR gene, so they have a hard time making neurotransmitters. They are also maybe heterozygous for that serotonin transporter, so they don't recycle their serotonin, and the standard antidepressants won't work. They're a val, they chew through the neurotransmitters more. And then on the other side of things, they have an inefficiency in their ability to make the whole end product you're looking for, which is the BDNF. So you can give them all the meds in the world. It ain't going to help. You got to actually solve the actual problems, the actual inefficiencies along that line. And the only things we know that help with those folks who are inefficient in making BDNF is exercise and lithium. So, so just knowing that you can give someone a little bit of lithium and give them some methylfolate, and oh my God, their med starts working. Or maybe they don't even need meds. You know, there are some studies.
Maybe that's what they're on. Yeah, it's a little.
Yeah, maybe that was the whole problem. There's some people who are homozygous. There is a study. Most of our studies are adjunct to standard treatments, so you can't really make a statement about whether it would help depression all on its own. But there are some studies of people who are homozygous with that 70% reduction in being able to make methylfolate who responded with major depressive disorder to just methylfolate supplementation. So that's pretty exciting, right?
Yeah.
But antidepressants, you just need a vitamin.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned that in one of your recent articles, or we're talking about, I guess, sort of this idea of cerebral folate, but looking at folate actually in the brain rather than just in the serum, and a rather invasive test, but doing a spinal tap and basically getting the cerebral spinal fluid and measuring how much folate was there. And this subset of people with treatment-resistant depression had it sounded like really incredibly low levels when they did this spinal tap in the cerebral spinal fluid, and they gave them fairly high doses of activated folate and responded. So I think you're right on that this could potentially be for some subset of people, a monotherapy.
Yeah, it would be very exciting. Those folks need folinic acid, which is kind of interesting, which is the step before methylfolate in the folate cycle. So folinic acid could get into the brain and then become methylfolates. And so you need both of them. And they need super high doses of folinic acid, enough that can make you pretty sick. So it would be important to really know that you had that. But they've also discovered cerebral folate deficiency may be a cause of some types of autism. So that's just kind of starting the research into that. So the last piece of the genetics that's very interesting, that I can make lots of unhealthy speculation about this, are folks. So there's a couple that are much higher risk in these populations of most psych diseases, but particularly things like bipolar and schizophrenia, so more psychosis. When we think about psychosis, it tends to be this idea of lots of inflammation and things being kind of stuck on, and things kind of going too hard and too fast. So too much communication, too much electrochemical signal. And in the brain, all of this is mediated by calcium ions and sodium ions, and kind of ameliorated by things like lithium and magnesium and potassium. So I'm sorry to take you to all this neurobiochemistry.
Oh, I love it. I hope people are enjoying it.
So, and I love this word, but it's kind of this key phrase of what is the kind of the major problem. It's called excitotoxicity, right? We've discovered these genes. Their ANC3 is the sodium genes, and then CAC and A1C, or CACNAC, are the calcium genes. Both sodium and calcium are positive ions, and they can go pouring through these sodium channels and calcium channels. If there's too much signal going through, you get excitotoxicity, so too much. And at an extreme level, this can cause things like seizures, right? Way too much signal. It's like an electric short, right? But also migraines and mania. All of these things are mediated in different areas of the brain, different rates of kind of excitotoxicity, but it's all a fairly similar pathology. And that's why actually things like mania, migraines, and seizures can all respond to anti-seizure meds. Because anti-seizure meds basically are insulators. They kind of insulate the electric grid up there, so you can't just short out things, right? So what we found is that people, for example, who are double mutants for the CAC and A1C, which is 10% of the population approximately, or 13%, something like that, they have more calcium channels. So they can actually think harder, right?
Yeah.
Because you can have more thoughts coming through. And they tend to, and we don't have any, and so they have more excitotoxicity. And there's some interesting things about that, because we don't really have any calcium channel blockers in the brain, right? When we think about migraines responding, sometimes you think, oh, but we give, verapamil to people with migraines, that helps. That's because it actually loosens up the vasculature around the brain, right? It doesn't actually, the verapamil doesn't really go through the blood-brain barrier.
Yeah, it's not acting at the neuronal level. It's still just acting, right on the vascular to promote either vasoconstriction, vasodilation. Yeah.
Exactly. So we don't have calcium channels blockers in the brain, except a few of our psychotropic meds. And what's interesting is it tends to be the ones that work for schizophrenia or OCD. OCD is also totally, you get stuck in this rumination loop and you just think and think and think and think and can't stop thinking, right? And so Luvox is a antidepressant that's fairly useless for everything except OCD. It happens to have some calcium channel blocking activities.
Interesting.
Clozaril, which is sort of it's a great drug, but it has terrible side effects. And it's sort of your last result antipsychotic. It's a calcium channel blocker in the brain. So is Safris, which is sort of like a cousin to Clozaril. And Zoloft at high doses is also a calcium channel blocker in the brain. And its high doses are also pretty good for OCD. So it just makes me think, did everything else not work? Because the real issue is they just have too much calcium, too much excitotoxicity pouring through the brain. And then there's nothing much we can do medication-wise about too much sodium, the ANC3. And there's some maybe interesting data. They might respond better to things like TMS, transmagnetic stimulation. There is a calcium channel blocker in the brain. There's a drug for pseudobulbar affect. So after a stroke or after MS or a head injury, people who kind of cry uncontrollably or giggle when they should be crying, things like that. There's a medication called Nuedexta that's approved for that. And it's an NMDA receptor antagonist plus a calcium channel blocker. And the drug is actually the cough syrup, dextromethorphan. Nuedexta is dextromethorphan. Yep, that cough syrup plus a tiny bit of a med quinidine that's only there to slow down your metabolism of the dextromethorphan so it'll last long enough to get into the brain and go through the blood-brain barrier. If you just take cough syrup on its own, unless you have the genetics where you can't metabolize it.
Unless you're a poor metabolizer. Yeah.
Right. So poor a 2D6. So those poor 2D6 metabolizers, they could just take, 2 milliliters of cough syrup, a child's dose. And they can get a nice dose in the brain. And I've seen some people with resistant depression, especially with those with a mutant calcium channel things, they respond super well to Nuedexta. Their depression melts away within a matter of hours. It's not FDA approved. It's not something, you have to really explain to people. On the other hand, dextromethorphan's available over the counter. It's been around forever. It's FDA, we can use things off label if we think that they will work. And right away, with antidepressants, you have to wait 6 weeks. With this, pretty much within a few hours whether it's going to work or not. So it's pretty low risk to try out something like that. And people who've tried everything and are pretty miserable. So that's where genetics leads you. You start to get the story of what's going wrong. You intervene at each stage. Maybe they need methylfolate. Maybe they don't. Maybe we should really avoid all these SSRIs because they're just not going to work. Or maybe we could use sort of a next generation serotonin agent like they're starting to come out with. If they can't make their brain fertilizer, the BDNF, you really need to focus on the exercise. Everyone benefits from exercise, but they benefit even more. And you might want to do a little bit of kind of nutritional low-dose lithium for that person. So you start to cobble together the issue and you put targeted results. And we just can't get too cocky and think, oh, well, we've solved the whole problem. We know everything. We don't. We know a tiny amount. But this is the future of psychiatry, in my opinion. And I think that the doctors are kind of putting their heads in the sand and sort of ignoring this and saying, there's not enough evidence or there isn't this. In one way, they're right. There's not enough evidence. But in the other way, this is the total future of what's going to happen. We're going to be able to modulate some of these things so much better than we used to. We'll have so much better understanding of why people are vulnerable. Everybody is bullied when they're a little kid, right? Everybody goes under stress, but some people develop, severe suicidal ideation or eating disorders or bipolar disorder after that bullying, and other people don't. Other people, sometimes it makes them stronger, right? So it's knowing that difference is why it makes them vulnerable. Maybe it's because they're a stress bomb and they release a ton of cortisol when it happens, whereas the other person's pretty chill. Maybe they're a stress bomb and a worrier, you know?
Yeah.
And so all of that is kind of in your genetics. So to me, it's really, really fascinating stuff. And the patients tend to really like it too. Though again, we can't get ahead of our skis and just say, oh, this is the total solution. This is why, which I think some people do. I mean, you can go on 23andMe, get all your, and you can go to some sort of nutrition website, and they'll give you this entire, genetically coded ideas
Diet.
for, hundreds of supplements that you can take. And of course, some of your genes are going to be kind of opposite risk than others. So they'll they'll tell you exactly opposite things. And people sometimes bring me these readouts that they got from these websites. And I say, look, this is way over the skis. We don't know much about these things. And because it'll tell you, no, you can only take, methylated B12, whereas this other person, you have to take betaine B12. And, we just don't know a lot of that stuff.
That was such a wonderful, wonderful description. I love how you really did tell it like a story, and sort of this process of kind of the neuron and the production of the neurotransmitters. And it really is quite beautiful. So people definitely go back and listen through that entire segment. It's so beautifully laid out. And I'm glad too that you acknowledge like this is all very, very new. I mean, really what we're trying to do here is really create new evidence. And so you mentioned something that also is one of my sort of pet peeves, and people say, well, there's no evidence for something, or what's evidence-based medicine? And I say, well, we got to create the evidence. We have to do the research. If we just simply did what, current evidence-based research or evidence-based medicine is telling us to do, we would never make progress. So we have to be willing to...
You have to use the art and common sense too. I mean,
yeah.
If you can't make neurotransmitters, add some freaking methylfolate.
Yeah.
And if you ignore all that, then you never figure out that part, and then you're just behind. You don't know why, and sure, there's no big studies of people using. I mean, there's some that were paid for by the genetic testing companies at the VA, for example, which is why Medicare and stuff will sometimes pay for this testing in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also kind of an open label, unfair trial. Here, you're showing one group of people you're just doing treatment as usual. The other group of people you're telling this beautiful story to, and you're saying, this is why it's going to work. So it's a very strong placebo effect. From a clinical perspective as a psychiatrist, I don't care. I'll use whatever I can get to get people feeling better. It's partly placebo or not. But from obviously a scientific perspective, that's really important. So the studies haven't been really fair, showing that it's helpful. But certainly my population of resistant people, I mean, it's just silly not to do it.
Yeah. No, I'm really grateful for your efforts to kind of pioneer and put this into direct clinical practice and kind of report on what you're seeing and the effects, and giving people a little bit of empowerment, saying look, we have something actionable that we can work on, and maybe you make a little improvement in one of those areas and they can make a bigger lifestyle change.
So I think just from a lot of them will have family members who don't understand depression.
Just saying, yes.
Pull yourself up by just get out of bed. What's wrong with you? Because they can't see the problem, right? And so if you can give them that printout and say, oh, well, here's this makes you vulnerable to stress here, and this here, and this here. Now we can fix this, but this is why it happened. And then they realize, oh, that's why my mom was that way too. And because she probably had those genes, and or some of them. And it can really help people kind of forgive themselves. Not that there's anything to forgive, right? But people carry a lot of guilt and shame that they have mental illness. Yeah. And this kind of says, no, it's just part of the cards that you were dealt, and we can do something about it.
Yeah. One of the things, as I've been listening, around here, we've been talking about, as you mentioned, the name of your blog is Evolutionary Psychiatry, and, looking at this ancestral lens and seeing the role of certain aspects of nutrition and maybe what we really should be doing and feeding, like how we should feed ourselves. And you mentioned a little battle between the psychologists and psychiatrists, and there's probably some people here, hearing you talk about everything, it sounds like, is about neurotransmitters and neurons and excitotoxicity of these things. But I thought like the neurotransmitter hypothesis was all a bunch of, was just created by the pharmaceutical companies for these drugs. And I thought the new theory now is all, it's, brain inflammation and results of metabolic dysfunction or issues with the microglial activation or an immune system actually in our brain. And where's the cohesion?
So you're absolutely right. So where the neurotransmitters come in is in the recovery and repair side. So that's the solution side, right? It's not the cause. Well, it can be the cause, because if you don't get that system, if that system isn't right, you can't recover and repair from the inflammation and microglial activation and all that's causing your ratty neurons to get ratty and not work as well and not repair themselves and not recover, and your communications between each other gets kind of broken down. And I think a better example of this, so this is a pathophysiology of depression or anxiety, where you get too much stress. Your sympathetic nervous system, so your fight or flight nervous system, is on all the time. Stress. And your parasympathetic nervous system, your rest and digest nervous system, gets kind of shrunken down and barely even works. And so after a while, there's so much kind of sympathetic activation and cortisol and adrenaline, go, that your brain is kind of like, stop, I can't take it anymore. And chronic pain is kind of similar, actually. So let's say you have a broken leg, a really bad ankle break, you have to have surgery. And even 10 years after the fact, you still might get twinges of pain, even though your bones are completely knit and they're all okay. That's because for a long period of time, a pain signal, the gas pedal was stuck on that pain signal going up into your brain. And the end, because the gas pedal's on, and the end gets kind of ratty and they can't keep up with the signal and the excitotoxicity and the inflammation going on, and it gets kind of ratty and there's no recovery and repair. And so you end up with a chronic pain signal, and you can give opiates for that, right? But then you end up popping up more pain receptors, more opiate receptors, because you upregulate them if you start to give more opiates, and you downregulate your own ability to make endorphins. And then after a while, just because the signal is broken, so if you stop the opiates, you have even more pain because now you have more receptors. And then they kind of stop working because the whole signal, kind of breaks down over time. And depression, anxiety, chronic pain, they're all, again, different areas of the brain, but it's all kind of mediated in the same way. And it is that chronic inflammation. The neurotransmitter side comes on the recovery and repair. So you need, serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine activation to get that cell to make the BDNF on the far end. And there are studies of things like fluoxetine causing recovery and repair in the hippocampus of humans through the elevation of BDNF. So we know that pathophysiology relatively well, but also, lack of serotonin doesn't cause depression. Lack of serotonin in the brain causes like suicide and violence and irritability and anger. PMS is a good example of that. You through your tryptophan faster when your progesterone is high. So women's serotonin levels drop, and you don't become super depressed. Usually, you become more irritable, right? So does that make sense? It's true that the straight up neurotransmitter theory of depression is debunked. It's kind of a more complicated part of a bigger theory.
Yeah, I think that was a great sort of, like I said, bringing some cohesion between really some of these more complex systems and the role of these certain neurotransmitters. And I like the idea of, one of the major other areas that people have been looking into is this concept, right, of neuroplasticity. And you've been kind of talking about the connectivity of certain networks and the firing of certain neurons. And I see this as we want to have as much flexibility and capacity for, all of our neuronal networks to be firing and for no particular system to be dominant or, underactive, and to be able to repair any type of insults that these neurons may have. And it sounds like, the things you've been talking about are addressing sort of all of that in one. And yes, that's the way we can target some of this connectivity and some of the deep breathing or meditation or mantra, some of these other mind-body practices can help on that, and exercise can help with the like connectivity and the BDNF or your greater capacity to build and repair new neurons. So to me, it makes complete sense in terms of the cohesion. It's a little more complicated, right, and complex, and maybe that's more difficult than simply, oh, you're low in serotonin, let me give you this medicine, and poof, everything will get better.
Yeah, but on the other hand, for something like just people who have just a little bit of PMS. You know what? You give that person a little temporary 5-HTP, which is the precursor for after tryptophan becomes 5-HTP, which eventually becomes 5-HT or serotonin.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, for just a week, a month, their PMS goes away. And so it's clearly sort of a serotonin mediated, at least part of it. Sometimes I simplify and make all this so much of a story that I may be kind of glossing over some of the complexity. So my apologies to people who really study this stuff. But
hey, we have to do something. We have to do something to make it accessible.
Translator between that the people who really know what they're talking about and the layperson. So I'm somewhere in between, right? But in general, generically, what we're looking to do is recover and repair. And any way that we can do that, whether it's therapy, so therapy can help you kind of unentrain some of those bad habits and get out of some of those bad coping skills and, figure out what emotions and bad cycles are making you repeat the same mistakes over and over. But then there's also exercise and meditation and anything to make meditation easier too. So binaural beats and other kind of interesting things. And then that's where food comes in. So there seems to be less inflammation and less microglial activation in the brain if you have a happy, healthy microbiome that likes whole food and not emulsifiers and not alcohol and not tons of NSAIDs and other things. So all of these multiple modalities, that's why they can all help. And the problem is that sometimes, when I'm looking at the definition of sort of like quackery in medicine, it's when someone's saying that one thing will cure all problems.
Yes.
So, food is medicine, food is, it can be medicine, don't get me wrong. But again, it's not like if someone were severely depressed and they, their family's bringing them in for their initial evaluation and they're suicidal and things like that. The first thing I wouldn't be is like, well, here's a list of, the Mediterranean diet. Good luck. That's not how I would intervene in that case. Right. But eventually getting people to do more home cooking, less exposure to some of those chemical emulsifiers that may screw up the microbiome. So making sure if they're vegan or something like that, or restricting food in some way, they're missing some of the major, most important things for the brain, like zinc or magnesium or long-chain omega-3s, B12, that you want to make sure that those are supplemented.
Yeah, I think, once again, you mentioned, I think when people start to say that this particular drug or this particular food or supplement, they have the cure-all, the reality is it's so much more complex than that. And I think you're doing a great job of really information gathering and really looking at all the potential inputs. And I take the incremental mindset, right? If we can make incremental changes and benefits in different parts of that system, whether it be the nutrients, the raw components, the ability to make certain neurotransmitters, the signaling, you make incremental changes in all those areas, you can make a lot of benefit. And I'd love to go back too as well to that statement I think you made with, it can be very difficult on families when someone in their family is depressed and they just don't understand, like, what are you, why are you so sad? Why can't you, get up? And they come back from the, psychiatrist, psychologist, and they ask them, well, what did you work on? Or what did they do? And, they don't have a great answer. And, it sounds like in working with you, whether or not it's good or right or wrong, there's potentially something, on paper or more concrete that someone might be able to understand that person's experience. And I think that's something that is really, from a stigma standpoint, and something that's weighing down a lot of people's recovery from mental illness, I think, is friends and family just not quite understanding it if they haven't lived through it, and not having something concrete to be able to wrap their minds around.
So I'm going to get a bit, I don't know, metaphysical or something like this. So back in the history of the humankind, like the shaman or the shaman would be the person who sort of cured illness. And it was generally thought to be sort of spiritual or caused by God or something like that. And the shaman generally sort of lived apart from the rest of the tribe. They were sort of revered in a certain way, but also kind of distrusted in another way. And often they would live a little bit outside the main village or something like that. So people would kind of go there and get the shaman to help them with their problem or illness or whatever it was. And the shaman was always, again, shoved outside. And then in medicine, that was the same too. Surgeons were sort of low-class individuals. Medical doctors didn't do much but let your blood and kind of check your pulse. Right?
Yeah.
But with modern medicine, psychiatry used to encompass, thousands and thousands of people. The old psych hospitals had 5,000 beds. I mean, it's just impossible to even think about how many people were institutionalized for very long periods of time. And a lot of that was actually tuberculosis or syphilis or something like that, or certain types of epilepsy that we can now, treat. And as soon as you found a medical cause for something, it got shipped out of psychiatry and stuck in, into infectious disease or into neurology or to something like that. And so psychiatry was just left with all the unexplained stuff, right? And so we were sort of left as the shamans, all the unexplained stuff, the bad spirits, the God curse, that kind of stuff. And we're sort of separate from medicine. In the US, even the insurance billing is carved out often to a different company, so the behavioral health company. So we don't even get the same level of insurance coverage that other medicine gets.
This
right?
is true. Yeah.
So it's part of what I love about kind of thinking about these things is that this brings us back to everybody else. But also, I do kind of get a kick out of, being the misunderstood person or whatever. If someone's if a patient is being irritable or their behavior is bad, in the hospital, they're just call psych, get rid of this problem. They don't know what the heck we do, but they certainly do need us when they need us. Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting being on that side of things. And as a psychiatrist, it's kind of interesting because when you tell people you're a psychiatrist, they either start telling you about all their meds that they're on or about their mom or whatever, or they clam up like you can read their mind, and they really don't want to talk to you at a party. So I certainly, never tell your hairdresser you're a psychiatrist because she'll start, getting your advice about everything. But it's I kind of like it from both sides. I like sort of being, people think all psychiatrists are quacks and that, mental illness is totally fabricated. And I sort of like being underestimated and then be able to kind of come up with real solutions and really help people really well.
Yeah, that underdog.
But at the same time, it's also nice to be, your whole job as a resident in psychiatry. We had a great teacher, George Valiant, who's a pretty famous psychiatrist, who came up with all the defense mechanisms. So projection and sort of the different levels of them, intellectualization and all those kinds of stuff. He did a lot of long-term studies of people in their lives and what they were like as young people, and then as they got older, what happened to them. And were there any things that you could learn? He would do 50-year studies of cohorts of people. And he said that our job as residents was to become as wise as our grandparents about things. And it is kind of funny to be able, as a middle-aged but young-looking woman, to drop some wisdom bombs on people.
Yeah. Oh, so man.
It's a fun profession. It can be stressful to be on all the time and to kind of hold everybody's issues and problems. But it's good to have, enough experience and talk to enough people to kind of have the wisdom of a grandparent. Not as good as some grandparents, but to have some of that and to be able to really help people in a way that nobody else can.
I love it. I mean, I almost went into psychiatry, and it was actually pushed that way tremendously by a lot of my close friends and my fiancés in psychiatry. And I agree with you. There's something to be said about, I love that term, dropping some wisdom bombs, or coming in with something when people are like, I really just don't have any answers. I don't know what to do. And being able to at least think about things in perhaps a more systematic way and have some different options. I think it is kind of fun and really, take that sort of underdog role, or, there's kind of low expectations. And
well, family medicine, you're going to be doing a lot of psych.
and that's what I was like, well, family medicine is psych plus.
Yeah. I think a third of the patients you see will have generalized anxiety disorder. And they won't be, it's fine if I tell them, oh, this symptom is part of your anxiety. That's why you're having these heart palpitations. They can hear that from a psychiatrist and they don't really get offended. But your family medicine doctor tells you that?
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh man, that bias and expectation. You're right. Well, Dr. Deans, Emily, this has just been so wonderful. I am so grateful for sharing this space with you. I still can't really believe that having you, on my show and being able to share all these things. It's been a blast following your work, and just so excited for all the things you're going to continue to offer to this space. And perhaps we'll have you back and talk more about this, because you're a great storyteller. You're a great clinician, and I think you have much to offer to everyone here. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and that's a very kind summary. I just try to do the best I can and try to figure out things for myself, and the only way I can really learn is through a story and partly through teaching others. So you guys are helping me out,
Yeah.
and stuff.
Well, if people, you mentioned earlier the blog and ways to sort of connect, but just here at the end, if you wanted to remind people, if they want to explore this more, how to follow you and get into it.
So I'm on Twitter as @Evolutionary Psy. I have some political opinions, my apologies, and sometimes pictures and recipes and things like that. And then if you just want my blog, it's Evolutionary Psychiatry. And I have two. One of them is my old Blogspot blog. I haven't updated, but there's hundreds of articles there, but I haven't been there in a few years. And but my newer stuff is all at Psychology Today. So you just Google Evolutionary Psychiatry, Psychology Today, or you Google my name, Emily Deans, at Psychology Today, and you'll find my blog. And again, there's all sorts of different stuff there, from climate to vitamin D to diet and depression to microbiome to genes and lithium and what's fun about it too is I think I did a magnesium article the other day.
Yeah, you did.
A researcher from England airmailed me his study, which is basically how they think lithium works, is by fooling the neurons into thinking they're magnesium deficient. And it's so cool to look at the paper, and I'm going to write an article on it, I'm pretty sure, coming up. But it's just great to have people email me or find me or mail things to my office, researchers. I've had people talk to me about parasites and mental illness and stuff like that, all sorts of really weird stuff. And it's just cool to be at the nexus of all that.
You really are on the front lines, and I think just absorbing so many new ideas worth at least an initial thought, and maybe an experiment. So thank you for that curiosity and courage.
I think it's a combination between my dad being an electrical engineer and I'm left-handed. So
that explains it all, 100%. Well, thank you again, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to meet you at some point. In the future, maybe at a conference, or it would be an absolute pleasure. So we'll see.
Cool. Well, thanks for having me on.
All right. I hope you have a good one. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presence and willingness to receive a new narrative, a passionate perspective, and perhaps a deeper sense of connection with our collective purpose. Please share this podcast with any and all that you believe will benefit from its intention to relieve one's doing and engage one's being. Please share your comments about the conversation on our podcast page and leave a review in iTunes so that the voices in this space can spread to all ears ready to receive it. Music credit goes to Dillingham for their song Vessel. Remain open, stay curious, and forever be love.
You walked on fire, and I know you tried.